when desire becomes an invisible chain. Have you ever found yourself chasing something, a job, a relationship, a goal, and midway through, in a moment of exhaustion, you stopped and asked yourself, why do I even want this? Not asking to find motivation to continue, not to strategize how to achieve it, but asking with the innocence of a child. No justification, no defense, no assumption that wanting is something you're naturally supposed to have. We live in a world where desire is celebrated as a natural right. We want money for security, love to feel complete, recognition to feel validated, peace to escape anxiety. And when we don't get what we want, we call it suffering, failure, the unfairness of fate. But there's something strange we rarely notice. Suffering doesn't come from the absence of something external. It comes from the very idea that I must have it. So the real question isn't, will I get what I want? But rather, why do I want it in the first place? And even deeper, who am I, the one standing behind this desire? This essay isn't here to teach you how to achieve what you want more effectively. It's also not advising you to renounce all desires in some ascetic or sacrificial way. Instead, it invites you to look directly at the nature of desire, without judgment, without escape, to see clearly where it comes from, what it is, and whether it's truly a part of you, or just an automatic movement of a mind that's been programmed long ago. Because when you see the origin of desire clearly, something miraculous happens. You're no longer controlled by it. And from there, an entirely different way of living, free, light, unconditional, begins to open up. The one isn't yours. Observe any desire that's present in you right now. Maybe it's wanting a new phone, wanting someone's attention, wanting more money in your account, or simply wanting a cup of coffee. Now ask, where does this desire come from? If you look closely, you'll see it's not something that naturally arises from within you. It's a product of memory. You once saw someone with that phone, and they looked happy. You once received attention and felt valuable. You once had money and felt secure. You once drank coffee and felt comfortable. The mind records these experiences, stores them as images, and whenever it encounters a similar situation, it pulls out the old image and says, I need this. But that's not you speaking. That's memory speaking. That's the past projecting onto the present and creating a sense of lack. That desire was never truly you. It's just an automatic response, formed by culture, society, media, family, and even unconscious fear within. For example, you want success. But if you were born in a society without the modern concept of success, you wouldn't want it. If you grew up in an environment where no one compared, no one judged, you wouldn't have the need to prove yourself. So then, the desire for success isn't a natural part of you. It was implanted, nurtured by conditioning. And here's what's important. When you don't get what you want, you feel unhappy. But actually, that's not unhappiness from reality. It's the ego's resistance when reality doesn't match the image it created. The ego has a script. I must have this to become complete. When the script doesn't play out correctly, it calls that failure, suffering. But if you look deeper, you'll see the thing you want wasn't even present in you a few minutes before you saw it. And it would fade into oblivion if not triggered by an image, an advertisement, someone's words. So then, that feeling of wanting isn't something real. It's just a movement of memory, of reaction, of unconsciousness. When you see this clearly, not through theory but through direct observation, something strange happens. Desire no longer has the power it once had. It may still appear, but you're no longer swept away by it. You see it as a passing wave, not a command you must obey. Why do you think you're entitled to get what you want? This is a deeper question, and it's not moral or sacrificial in nature. It's a question to look at the root of the ego. The ego, at its most basic level, believes it's the center of the world. It has ideals, it has expectations, and it believes the world needs to bend to fit that structure. When that doesn't happen, suffering arises. But why does the ego have this belief? Because from birth, we're taught that we are separate entities, entitled to happiness, entitled to love, entitled to respect. And that sounds right, doesn't it? But if you look closely, you'll see that this very idea of entitlement is the source of all conflict. When you believe you're entitled to something, you automatically create a gap between who I am now and who I should be. And that gap is suffering. You always feel lacking, always feel insufficient, always feel you need to achieve something more to become whole. But observe nature. The wind doesn't blow according to your wishes. The sun doesn't rise because you pray. Death doesn't come according to your schedule. Everything is happening in a vast order that individual will cannot interfere with. Trees don't want to grow taller. They just grow according to their nature. Rivers don't want to flow to the sea. They just flow. The moon doesn't want to shine. It just reflects light. So why should humans be different? Why do we think we have the right to control reality according to our desires? The answer is because we've separated ourselves from the whole. We've created a wall between me and the world. And from there, we begin to fight to keep to avoid losing. But if you see clearly that there is no separate me, that you're just part of a larger flow, then desire loses its meaning. It's not that you suppress it, but that you see its empty nature. And when that happens, an entirely different state begins to blossom. When desire is fear in disguise. There's something most of us don't realize. Most desires aren't real desires. They're fear in disguise. You want money. But if you look deeper, you'll see it's not wanting money. It's fearing not having enough, fearing abandonment, fearing not being respected. You want love, but actually you're afraid of loneliness, afraid of being worthless, afraid no one sees you. You want success, but behind it is the fear of failure, fear of being looked down upon, fear of not being good enough. Desire is the front of the coin. Fear is the back. And both come from the same source. The idea that I am a separate entity, vulnerable, needing to be protected and reinforced. When you want something, stop and ask, what am I afraid of? Don't answer hastily. Sit with that question. Observe the sensation in your body. Observe the thoughts that arise. And you'll see, behind every desire is a specific fear. For example, you want recognition from others. If you look deeply, you'll see it's the fear of not existing. The ego believes that if no one sees it, it will disappear. It needs external validation to feel real. But that's an illusion. You don't need anyone's validation to exist. You already exist, not as an ego, but as part of life itself. When you see clearly that desire is just fear in disguise, you're no longer fooled by it. You don't need to fight it, don't need to suppress it. You just need to see it as it is, a movement of fear, and it will dissolve on its own. The meaninglessness of wanting. There's a simple experiment you can do right now. Think of something you really wanted a few years ago. Maybe it was an object, a relationship, a job position. Now ask, does it still matter to you? In most cases, the answer is no. What you once thought was necessary for happiness is now just a faded memory. Maybe you got it, and it didn't bring what you expected. Maybe you didn't get it, and life went on anyway. Either way, you see that desire wasn't as important as you once thought. So then, why do you believe your current desire will be different? Why do you think that this time, when you get what you want, you'll truly be satisfied? This is the trap of desire. It always promises a better future, but never delivers on the promise. When you achieve one thing, the mind immediately creates a new desire. You think you're making progress, but actually you're just running on a treadmill, always moving but never arriving. And here's what's profound. Desire can never be satisfied because its nature is lack. It only exists when there's a gap between what I have and what I want. When that gap disappears, desire disappears. But the mind can't live in a state without desire, so it immediately creates a new gap. When you see this clearly, not through thinking but through direct observation, you'll see the meaninglessness of wanting. It's not that you become pessimistic or indifferent. It's that you see clearly. Happiness never comes from getting what you want. It comes from no longer being controlled by desire, the state of non-seeking. So then, if there's no more desire, how will you live? This is the question many people fear. They think that without desire means without motivation, without purpose, without meaning. But that's a misunderstanding. The state of non-seeking doesn't mean you become passive or numb. It means you no longer live from a place of lack. You no longer feel you need to achieve something to become whole. You're already whole, right now, as you are. From that state, action still happens, but it no longer comes from fear or lack. It comes from a different source. Awareness, stillness, presence. You work not to prove yourself, but because the work needs to be done. You love not to be loved back, but because love is the natural state when there's no ego blocking it. You live not to achieve some goal, but because living itself is the purpose. In this state, whatever happens is no longer a problem. You no longer ask, what will I get? But live as an open space for life to flow through. And that life itself, not through will, not through conditions, is what you've always been seeking, though you never realized it. This isn't some far-off ideal. It's a possibility present right now. When you see the nature of desire clearly, when you're no longer fooled by it, the state of non-seeking naturally blossoms. It's not that you try to achieve it, but that you stop creating what prevents it, living from a different source. When you're no longer driven by desire, you begin to live from an entirely different source. This source isn't something you need to seek or achieve. It's always been there, beneath the noise of desire and fear. Imagine a lake. The surface is always rippling from wind, from rain, from objects falling in. But deep below, the water is completely still. Desires are the ripples on the surface. They're always changing, always moving, always creating disturbance. But if you dive deep, you'll find a stillness unaffected by anything on the surface. That source is awareness, not awareness of something, but awareness as a state of being. When you live from awareness, you no longer need to chase happiness, because happiness isn't something you get. It's the natural state when there's no inner conflict. In this state, you no longer ask, why do I want this? Because desire is no longer the center of your life. You're no longer caught in the game of getting and losing. You simply are present, aware, alive. And from there, everything changes. It's not that external circumstances change, but the way you relate to them changes. You no longer resist reality. You no longer try to bend it to your will. You simply are here with what is, and from that presence, right action naturally arises. Practice. Observe the origin of desire. In the first week, choose a specific desire that's present in you. Don't choose something too big or abstract, but something simple, maybe wanting an object, wanting someone's attention, or wanting a particular experience. Each day, spend 10 minutes sitting quietly and observing this desire. Don't try to analyze or explain it. Just observe. How does it appear in your mind? Does it have images? Does it have sensations in your body? Does it come from a specific memory? When you imagine having what you want, what feelings arise? And when you imagine not having it, what feelings appear? For example, if you want a new phone, observe, where do you see the image of it? In an advertisement? In someone else's hands? When you think about having it, what do you feel? Excitement? Security? Recognition? And when you think about not having it, what do you feel? Lack? Inferiority? Anxiety? Don't rush to conclusions. Just observe as if you're watching a river flow. The purpose isn't to eliminate desire, but to see clearly where it comes from and how it operates. Identify the fear behind the desire. In the second week, go deeper. With each desire you observe, ask, what am I afraid of? Don't answer with your head. Sit with that question and let the feeling reveal itself. You might find that behind the desire to be loved is the fear of loneliness. Behind the desire for success is the fear of not being good enough. Behind the desire for money is the fear of insecurity. Don't judge these fears. They're a natural part of the human mind. Just see them as they are. When you see the fear clearly, stay with it. Don't run away. Don't try to solve it. Just observe. What does this fear feel like in the body? Where is it? Chest? Stomach? Throat? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? Does it have a sound? When you observe fear without running away, something strange happens. It begins to lose its power. It's not that it disappears immediately, but you see that it's not as dangerous as you thought. It's just a sensation, a movement of energy, not a truth about you. Practice living unconditionally. After 2 weeks of basic practice, start experimenting with living unconditionally. Choose one day a week, maybe a weekend day, and decide that on this day, you won't try to achieve anything. You won't try to please anyone, won't try to prove yourself, won't try to reach any particular goal. This doesn't mean you do nothing. You can still work, still meet people, still do your usual activities, but you do them without the motive of achieving anything. You do them just because they're happening, not because you want a specific result. For example, if you cook just for the act of cooking, not to create a perfect dish or to be praised. If you talk to someone, talk just because the communication is happening, not to make an impression or to be liked. If you take a walk just because your feet are moving, not to achieve health or relaxation. Observe what happens when you live this way. Do you feel lighter? Do you feel freer? Or do you feel insecure because there's no goal? Don't judge anything you see. Just observe. Sit with the fundamental question. Finally, spend time each day sitting with the question, who am I, the one who wants this? Don't look for an answer. This question isn't meant to be answered, but to open a space of observation. When you ask, who am I? The mind will try to give answers. I'm this name, this age, this profession, this role. But don't accept those answers. Keep asking, but who is the one knowing these things? Who is the one observing these thoughts? When you go deep into this question, you'll see that there's no fixed I. There are thoughts, there are sensations, there are emotions, but there's no central entity owning them. There's only awareness, a vast space in which everything is happening. When you see this clearly, not through theory, but through direct experience, desire loses its meaning. Because if there's no I, then who is wanting? And if there's no one wanting, then desire is just an empty movement without roots. From there, an entirely different way of living begins to open up. Not because you try to change, but because you see the truth. And that truth itself liberates you. Closing. Why do you want what you want? This isn't a question to answer once and forget. It's a question to live with, to observe daily, to look into deeply each time desire arises. When you see clearly that desire isn't yours, that it's just an automatic movement of memory, of conditioning, of fear, you'll no longer be controlled by it. And when you're no longer controlled by desire, you begin to live from a different source. Awareness, stillness, presence. In that state, happiness isn't something you achieve. It's what you are, right now, unconditionally, independent of anything external. And that's what you've always been seeking, though you never realized it. So stop. Really stop. Don't chase the next thing. Don't try to achieve anything more. Just be here with what is and see clearly you've been whole all along. Nothing is lacking. Nothing more is needed. There's only life happening, breathing, present, and that is enough.